the fact that he is the Son of God, that he is God in the flesh. These are things that we all have in common. Now, do all religious groups have that belief in common? No. No, you can find some that are completely different, what I would call a completely different culture. And that would be like, for instance, let's say Jehovah's Witnesses. Because they have their particular understanding of things that is what obviously I do not believe is biblical, and I don't think anybody else here would believe is biblical, but it is unique to them. And so you can pretty much, when you listen to a Jehovah's Witness talk, you don't even know he's a Jehovah's Witness, and you hear him talk, and you pretty much can come to the conclusion, that guy's a Jehovah's Witness, just based upon the things that he says. Okay, so, and that's part of the ideas that are inherent within it. And we could go on talking about things like that, but the point is that we all have common ideas. Now, that isn't true about everything else. I'm pretty sure we have all kinds of different ideas about all kinds of other things, whether it be politics, whether it be sports, whatever it might be. We're going to be of differing understanding and different viewpoints, right? But if we are going to have a community of believers that is creating this culture that brings us together, that we all have in common, there are some things that we all have to agree on, and we do agree on. And some of those things we've already talked about. One in particular that I would say is specifically, I think it's unique to the biblical text, but it's unique to churches of Christ. And what would that be, do you think? Can you read my mind? Well, that's dealing with the authority of it. But there are a lot of people, even within the Presbyterian tradition, there are those who still to this day hold to the idea of the silence of the Scriptures. They call it the regulatory principle. But there is one in particular that makes us unique. And I'm not talking about the non-use of instrumental music. Baptism. Baptism, okay? Do you know anybody in any other religious tradition, Christian tradition, who believes that baptism is absolutely necessary in order to be saved? I only know of one other group. Well, the Christian church, but I consider them to be my brethren in error. But nonetheless, they do hold to that. It would be the United Pentecostals. Now, they have all other kinds of problems because they believe you have to baptize in the name of Jesus only. They also believe that there's only one in the Godhead, so they have all other kinds of problems. But I can't think of any other religious tradition that in my mind, maybe you guys have thought of some, that teaches the idea that you have to be baptized in order to be saved. That seems to be unique to us. Okay, so these are just the common ideas that we have. Well, when it comes to language, and we could deal with what would be, tongue-in-cheek Church of Christ language, because we do have that. I mean, that's clear. Some of the things that just kind of crack me up, or they're kind of even redundant, like, when somebody says separate and apart from the Lord's Supper, when they're talking about the contribution. Well, separate and apart. Are they separate or are they apart? Or are they both? And if they're both, that's two negatives and that makes a positive. So they're together, right? I'm just kind of kidding around here. But we do have, as churches of Christ, we have our own common vernacular. But even within Christian tradition, there is a common language that is spoken. And generally, it is biblical words. Words like redemption, words like reconciliation, words like propitiation. I mean, how often do you use the word propitiation in a sentence? When would you use the word propitiation in a sentence? In this setting right here. And that's about the only time. Now, that isn't unique to us, but nonetheless, it is something that is unique to the Christian faith. All right? And then behavior. Now, this should be true across the board. Not everybody, obviously, does this, but everybody knows they're supposed to do it. How are we supposed to behave? Okay, to follow Jesus as he is our example. Can you be more specific? Can anybody be more specific on that? Holy, can you unpack that one a little bit? Okay.
Synonyms: sanctified, set apart from the world, okay. Different from the world.
But how is that demonstrated?
In our behavior,
yeah.
In our language, in our ideas.
Yeah, okay. I can't say that he's wrong. He's right about that.
Take the microphone away from him.
What I'm looking for is things like, for instance, the practices of morality, right? And so you have areas in which it is understood that you cannot engage in immoral behavior. Like premarital sex is something that is totally off the board for anybody who claims to be a Christian. Or adultery is something that, again, is completely off the board. Now, is that off the board for everybody in the world? Not in practice. In reality, it should be, but in practice, it's not. And many people don't even feel any qualms about that kind of stuff. They would look at it as being kind of prudish sorts of behavior. And we could go on and on looking at all the different kinds of ways of morality. You can look at issues that are hot-button issues today, like, for instance, transgenderism or homosexuality or abortion. I think we're all on the same page on that. Wouldn't you agree? I can't imagine anybody within particularly any kind of a conservative mindset that would hold to the position that transgenderism is something that is acceptable to God, or that homosexuality is something that is acceptable to God, or that this idea of aborting babies is something that is acceptable to God. So we all have that same kind of common moral idea, common moral behavior, all of that. Okay, now that's culture. And we're trying to implement this. We bring this then into the way that we characterize the way we live our lives, the way we behave. Now, when you're looking at it from the perspective of the biblical teaching, how is it that we convince people that they need to behave this way and they need to think this way? How do we do that?
Most importantly, they see us living it.
Okay,
Yeah,
by our example, that's for sure. But I think there's something that's even more fundamental. Cynthia has a comment down here, Tim.
Well, it starts with belief in God.
Okay,
They have to believe that God has authority over us and that it's good for us to do what he says to do.
okay. So how do we convince them of that?
Get them to look at the Bible, maybe?
Okay, there's a word I'm looking for. That's true. Get them to look at the Bible. But what if they don't respect the Bible?
I think
That's a question that I've often confronted. Caleb had a comment, Tim, right here. Caleb, just make sure you, and Michael has a comment. We'll go to Caleb, then we'll go to you, Michael.
One of the verbs that Jesus uses is shine.
Okay.
It says, you are the light of the world. And so exposing the world to truth can absolutely happen through example. It can happen through the way that we talk to people. It can happen through what we challenge them with and what we proclaim to be true. There's lots of ways of broadcasting that information. But in engaging them with what is true and asking them to compare that to the things that are false, I mean, that's fundamental to the process. I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Michael, what were you going to add? Okay. Mark, did you have your hand up?
I was going to say example.
Okay. The thing that I'm looking, go ahead, Tim.
I think one of the things is we can show with, like Paul mentioned with the example, but showing how our lives are different when things are not going well. Mm-hmm. Recognizing that the peace that we can have, how we can be comforted when we're facing tragedy.
Okay.
Recognizing that God's going to take care of it.
Okay. And all of that, and everything that you guys have said, I think is correct. But all of that, it seems to me, is one of the things in which it is adorning the message of the gospel. That's what Paul talks about. You're adorning the message of the gospel by the way that you live. But if people see you living this way, and that's all they see, are they going to come to Christ? What has to happen? Caleb touched on it already. Michaela, Michaela has a comment up here, Tim.
Not only to shine, but also to reach out, to
Okay.
talk to people. We have to use our voice and
There
talk
you
to
go.
them.
There you go. So what it is we have to engage them in conversation. We have to talk to them. And in talking to them, there is this element of persuasion. Can you force anybody to become a Christian? They didn't force people in New Testament times. Now, if you look at some religious traditions like Islam, I was reading an interesting article about that today. And their way of doing things is either by the bullet or the ballot. That's how they say it. The bullet or the ballot. That's demonstrated what happened up in New York City, interestingly enough. But anyway, the point is that's not how Christians engage in conversation. They engage in a way in which they're seeking to persuade, to convince people. And that's what Paul talks about in the ministry that he was engaged in as an apostle, how that he sought to persuade people. But in order to persuade people, you obviously have to talk to them. Now, the how you talk to them that's another element that some of that I think we might be able to address tonight. But what I want to go on from there is to talk about that what we're dealing with then is a way in which we have to change the way we think. Okay, I want to read you one of the questions that was in the box, actually two questions that were the same thing. And one of the questions, and I don't know who wrote these, and you don't have to, they're anonymous, so you don't have to tell me who wrote it, or you don't have to identify yourself. But here is one of the questions, which I thought, the first one was, we have a lot of duties as Christians. How do we prioritize evangelism amongst our many commands and duties? Is evangelism the most important command to follow? And that word most is underlined. And then the second question that goes kind of along with this, it says, how should evangelism be prioritized against other aspects of Christian life, such as family relationships, family responsibilities, serving other people, doing good, etc.? And then there was a two-part to that. Does the role of an evangelist differ from the responsibility that all Christians are to evangelize? And then there was put in a kind of a parenthetical statement. They go to Acts chapter 6, and they talk about the different, what they call priorities given to different individuals. And that, of course, is when they were choosing the apostles. No longer, what they were trying to do was to give certain responsibilities to different people in order to carry out the benevolent needs of the church there in Jerusalem. Okay, so let's talk about that for just a minute. And I think we can spend a little bit of time with that, because this is what it seems to me is one of the premier factors that can help us to change the way we think. And that is this idea of prioritizing. Now, I'll tell you how I answered the question. The way that I put it was that primarily what I was focusing on was the difference between an evangelist, which is spoken of over in Ephesians, the 4th chapter, where it talks about how that Jesus had ascended, and he gave gifts to his people, and then he lists the gifts: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. So there is an office or a work of an evangelist. But how does that differ from the work that everybody is to do in evangelism? Anybody have any thoughts about that? Because I think there is a difference. Is everybody called to be an evangelist like in Ephesians chapter 4? There you go. And that's from James. I'm glad you mentioned that, Caleb. It shows that you were paying attention to your class. That's over in James chapter 3. Be not many of you teachers. Okay? But that's not saying you can't go out and talk to people, right? It is saying, though, that you take upon yourself a responsibility like I have done, like Caleb has done over the past 6 months, like our elders do when they gather together, and or they gather up here and they have a class and things of that nature, or anybody who teaches a class. There's something that is different about that. Something that is different, even in the sense of an evangelist going out and about doing the things that he does in the preaching and the teaching that he does, that is different from everybody else. And I really, for me, I struggle to find out what is the difference. I'm not sure I have it, but I do think I have it. Anybody want to make a suggestion before I share with you my thoughts on that? Apparently not. Okay, Joanne.
I was just going to say that if that's your particular gift or your passion, then it's going to be a lot higher in your priorities than if you're just an everyday person. An everyday person should just be looking for opportunities and be prepared to give an answer.
Okay, all right. Mark had a comment.
I think to the larger question, probably the first priority for a person that's attempting to do the work of an evangelist or just someone in the rank and file, a pew sitter, is to be converted yourself.
Okay.
That
That's a good
you
point.
would put your priority on first, not being perfect, but being genuinely converted, being aligning your life so that as many aspects as possible illustrate that you're on God's team, that you are God's people.
Now,
And
are
to
you
work-
speaking of that just unique to an evangelist?
No, I'm saying for
In general, okay.
for everyone to do that.
Right.
That a person that is going to be convinced to follow Christ needs to see it in action in some measure. And doesn't need to be an abstract idea. They need to actually see it demonstrated. And it may start with having enough concern for someone to talk to them about Jesus' teachings.
Okay.
But then that person doesn't have to be perfect and flawless and polished, but they have to never give any doubt as to whether they believe or not,
Okay.
what it is that they believe.
Okay.
And so that priority, and then what do I do next, and what do I do after that? Well, that will fall into order, I think, as you first be converted yourself.
Right.
And
That's
I'm
right.
thinking specifically about the Macedonians in 2 Corinthians 8. They surprised everyone with their generosity, but Paul knew the secret. He said, I've spent time with these people. I know that they are converted, that they are converted themselves. And, they have in their mindset, I can do all things. And I didn't mean win the Heisman Trophy and score the winning run in the World Series. I can do all things that Jesus has told me to do through Jesus, that Jesus will help us to follow him.
Okay.
And we have to live as though we believe that, I
Okay,
think.
all right. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that too, because that's one of the key factors, I think, that is characteristic of changing the way we think. Michaela?
Jesus says the two greatest commands, love God and love others. What is the most loving thing that we can do for others
Right.
other than snatch them from the fire?
Right, right. That's a good point. Okay, so all of those answers are good, but in my mind at least, I have not yet heard the distinction between somebody who is serving in the role of an evangelist versus everybody else who's to evangelize. So what's the difference?
They're getting paid.
Okay. Bingo. Bingo. I think that what you see is somebody who has dedicated his life to preaching and teaching and doing what he can to spread the message of the gospel in order to be able to, because that is something that is his passion, as Joanne said, that he wants to do. In many cases, he feels compelled to do, as the Apostle Paul was, because Paul even said he wouldn't take money because he believed that it was, that is, he wouldn't take money from the church at Corinth because he believed that he had to make a sacrifice because Christ had made a sacrifice for him, and so he refused to take their money. But what we're dealing with is somebody who is, for lack of a better way of saying it, and I could not find a synonym to match this, they're employed. And that means, therefore, that this is all that they do. Now, is that all that you people do? Obviously not, but it could be. It could be. And that's where we have to change the way we think. Because, and Mark pointed this out, it's by the way we live our lives. Paul made that observation too as well. But then there are opportunities that you might have to be able to talk to somebody, just to talk to them about spiritual things. And you may not even be the one who brings it up. Somebody else might bring it up. But that then gives you the avenue in order to be able to carry on a conversation, to begin to talk to them about these things. So the thing that I had put down when I was answering this question is that the work of an evangelist is a special work, just like the work of an apostle was a special work, the work of a prophet was a special work, the work of a shepherd or an elder, a pastor, is a special work. So there are these special works, but everybody has been given the responsibility to do what they can to take the message of the gospel to other people. And you see that Mark used the illustration of the Macedonians that Paul praised, and that was in their giving, the fact that they were willing to freely give of their money. But I would say that the one that illustrates the point in my mind is over in Acts chapter 8 and verse 4.
That's what I was
Is that what you're going to say? Okay. Okay. Over in Acts chapter 8, verse 4, where this great persecution happened in the church of Jerusalem, you remember? And where did the apostles go? They stayed there. Where did everybody else go? They were scattered. And what did they do? They talked to people about Jesus. Okay? And that was a world that, our world is kind of getting like that. It's not quite, I don't think, as near as bad as the first century was, but we are in that kind of situation today. At least we're developing into that situation, and it's getting, in some ways, there has been what people have characterized as a revival that's going on throughout Western culture, which to me would be great if that's actually happening. I think more so in Africa it's happening than any place else on the face of the earth. But whatever the case, within Western culture is becoming more and more secular, more and more immoral, and it's like ancient Rome, getting more and more like ancient Rome. Christianity blossomed and flourished in ancient Rome. So the difference then, as I said, is that not all of us are evangelists in the formal sense of the term. But all of us can evangelize. That is, we can all share the gospel. Share it with people who need to hear this message. Okay, now, so that was the first question. I don't know if it answered it. When it comes to prioritizing, too, by the way, and it says, is that the most important command? I struggle with the idea of saying any command is more important than any other command. The command to be a good mother, the command to be a good wife, the command to be a good father, the command to be obedient children, the command to be a good citizen of the nation that you live in. I think these are all commands that we have to do. So to say that you're prioritizing things, I don't think is necessarily an incorrect way of saying it. It's just what is most important to me. But there are elements in which you can have people. In fact, Caleb and I have talked about this. I have known men who were so dedicated to the teaching of the gospel that they lost their families. They were busy out doing everything that they could in spreading the message of the gospel, and they did not pay attention to their wife. They didn't pay attention to their kids. And consequently, they wound up losing their families. Do you think that that's acceptable to God? I wouldn't. I wouldn't think that was. So the issue in my mind is not that you prioritize something over something else. It's the idea that we take and we incorporate it all into one thing. So that whether you're a father or you're a mother, you're teaching your children, you're teaching those who you can come into contact with, perhaps at work if you have opportunities to share the message of the gospel with them. You're looking for opportunities to do that. And the only way that that can happen is we have to change the way we think. It's not going to be that we change our behavior and that's it. Because then it becomes, in my mind, it becomes almost legalistic. It becomes like this is a duty that I have to do. And I don't believe that that should be the perception that people have of what evangelism is all about. Now, we oftentimes refer to it as a duty, but it's got to be something more than that. And it sure has to be something more than, I need to do this because if I don't, I'm going to go to hell. Kind of the guilt trip that oftentimes people feel themselves being put on because they're not as active perhaps as somebody else, and they look at somebody else's behavior and the way that they're going about things, and they're thinking, why can't I do that? Well, maybe you don't have the talent that they have, but that doesn't mean you can't do something. Cynthia?
I like to look at the parable of the lost coin, the gratitude.
Yeah.
God
There
has
you go.
given me something so wonderful, I just can't help but want to share it with other people.
That's right. Okay, that takes us to the first point, the first factor. It's not quite articulated the way that Cynthia articulated it, but I think it's the same thing. And that is the fact that if we are going to create an evangelistic culture, that is a mindset, the way we think, the ideas, the behavior, the language that we use. If we're going to be able to do that, then we have to be motivated by something else. And that motivation, and I think that this is what Cynthia is getting at, would be the love that we have for the Lord. Okay, so that would be the first thing I would put down here, as we'll put down here factors. And the first one I would put is love. Okay, now that love can go into two different directions. The love that we have for Jesus and the love that we have for others. And I think that's what Michaela was talking about, right, Michaela? Okay, so the love that we have for Jesus and the love that we have for one another. I want you to turn over to 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter. There's a passage here that really, it stood out to me when I was going through this and working my notes in doing this, preparing for this period of time that we have here tonight. But I want you to notice with me what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Now, first of all, let me make this observation, that the context of this is Paul is talking about his ministry. And Paul has been through some terrible ordeals. But listen to what he says here in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, beginning in verse 14. He says, "For the love of Christ," some translations say constrains us. The English Standard Version uses the word controls us. So, for the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died, and he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but live for him who for their sake died and was raised. Okay, the thing I want to focus on is this idea of this love that is being talked about. As he says here, for the love of Christ controls us. The love of Christ constrains us. Now, there are two ways in which that has been actually been understood. One is in a subjective way and one is in an objective way. And I think both of them eventually blend together. If you look at it from the perspective of a subjective way, it is the love that Christ has for us. And we have experienced that love by virtue of the fact that we have become his children. So we've experienced God's love through Christ, because we are now in a right relationship with him that we could have never had through anybody else except Jesus. So the love of Christ, that is, the love that Christ has for me, controls me. And it controls me so that I want now to demonstrate my love for Christ. There is the objective. So the love of Christ constrains us. Whether you look at it subjectively or objectively, they go hand in hand. Because my love for Christ should motivate me because of Christ's love for me, because of what Jesus did for me. And don't you think that that's what Paul was constantly thinking about throughout his entire ministry? I mean, you think about this guy who was the number one enemy of the Christian faith, and he's on his way to go get Christians, and he has this experience with Jesus. And when he does a complete 180. And now the greatest enemy of the faith has become the greatest teacher of the faith. Do you think that because he felt such love from Christ, that wouldn't motivate him to show his love for Christ and thus to show his love for other people who needed this message, which is what he talks about? That was what his ministry was all about. Now, we're not going to be apostles. But when we are finally, and I think Mark addresses this, when we are finally have reached this understanding of how much God has loved me, then that should motivate us to want to demonstrate to other people how much God can love them and how much I want to love them by showing them the message that is going to set them free. Be able to give them a right relationship with God because of what Jesus has done for us. You know, sometimes it seems to me that this work of evangelism, what we'll call it a work of evangelism, that is, we go out and we try to talk to people about spiritual things. The illustration that I have, and I've used this illustration before in other lessons, To me, it's kind of like trying to rake up a pile of leaves as you're going uphill and you have the wind in your face. You ever do that? I do that every fall. You know, it seems like our house faces towards the north, and we have a hill that slopes down. Those of you who've been to our house, you know, and I've got these 2 massive oak trees that drop their leaves all at the same time. And I got to go out and rake those things up, and I'm raking them uphill. I've tried every blower that has ever been created, I think. Actually, I haven't. I've never used the one Phoebe has used. I think that one might work. But I have used different kinds of blowers, and it just doesn't work. I have to rake them uphill. And then God blesses me with a wind out of the northwest. And it gets so frustrating. Well, I think sometimes that's what happens when we try to go out and talk to people about spiritual things. Because if you have tried to do that, and again, this is something that is subjective to every individual. How successful have you been in your efforts to try to share the message of the gospel with people? And by that I mean actually they become Christians. Tim?
Boils down to how we look at what success is.
Okay, that's
And
right.
if we define success that someone is converted to the way of Christ,
Okay.
then the reality is, at least for me, I've been not very successful.
Yeah, okay.
But if the
And-
success is I've actually talked to people,
Right.
that's a different
Right.
measure.
That's a completely different thing. But let me point this out, and I think that this is important, and then we'll come to you, Paul. I think one of the things that is true about that, to me, it's kind of like raking leaves. So that when I rake those leaves and they're finally up there and I think I've done a good job, and then all of a sudden all the wind has blown them all back down in my yard before the city can come out and suck them up. Okay, that to me looks like I'm pretty discouraged, because everything that I just did, I don't look at the effort I put forth. I look to see what is the results. And that's commonly what we do, is it not? And I think that's true even in evangelism, and that's an unfortunate thing, because that's not what defines success, as Tim has pointed out. Paul?
Jokingly, first off, I don't rake leaves, and second off, why don't you just set them on fire after you get them in a pile?
Because I can't. The city will come on me like a duck on a June bug.
But anyway, seriously,
You
what
live in the county. You can do that kind of stuff, Paul.
yeah, I can do just about anything over there. But anyway, seriously, what I measure success on is that you've completed the mission that God has given us to do, and that's to plant, water, and wait. And that's the way I measure success. If you've done that, and you've done it to the best of your ability, to plant and water and wait and doing your part in that, to me, that's how you measure success.
Right.
I think many a times where we've failed in evangelism, and where we've failed, and we've even failed preachers sometimes on how we've treated them, is we measure it in the world standards of numbers, in which we shouldn't do that. We should measure it on the standard that God gives us and that Paul wrote. It's plant, water, and wait.
Okay.
And to me, when you measure success that way, for me, it's been much easier to continue. Because if
Yeah.
you look at it at numbers, it's discouraging. You're
Yeah.
never going to get the numbers you want.
Yeah.
But
Well,
if you look,
and I think, you know, to kind of make an observation about that point, the planting is the most important part, because we can't give it the growth. Obviously, as Paul points out, it is God who gives the increase. So there is the planting, there is the watering, and there is the waiting, as Paul has pointed out. But the watering and the waiting is one of those kinds of things, particularly when you're watering it, you already got somebody who's interested and you're continuing to water it. What we're talking about is something that is just, it's fresh. There's nobody's ever talked to them about it. At least I've never talked to them about it. And what I'm suggesting then is that this first factor, this primary thing, is this love that we have for Jesus. This love that we've experienced because of Jesus. And that, to me, it seems, is where we begin then to change the way we think. Because this is not going to be done by just making people feel guilty and get out there and do things. I mean, if that's the case, you know, then the Jehovah's Witnesses are the most successful, because they send people out who constantly get doors slammed in their face, and yet they continue to do it. And why? Because their concept is salvation by works in the first place, that if you don't do this stuff, you're never going to get to heaven, or their understanding of what heaven is, which is really, it's bizarre. But anyway, that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make people feel guilty. We're trying to make people feel loved. And so by feeling loved, then you want to share that with someone else. Can you remember when you first started dating your spouse, those of you who are married, and you found out that you were genuinely cared for this person? Did you keep it to yourself? And especially if they requited that love? I don't think so. I know I didn't. In fact, my mother told me that if I don't take Pat, I'm an idiot. And she actually said those words to me. I think Pat's the only one of the in-laws my mother ever liked. Oh, boy, I hope that that's not recorded. It probably is, and I'll probably regret that I said that. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get at is that when we understand how we have been loved, then you cannot help but want to demonstrate that love. The love for Christ constrains us. It controls us. So that now we want to do what we can in trying to talk to other people. And the more loved that you feel, the more you want to tell people about that. And I think that is just one of the ways that we change the way we think. We need to understand how truly loved we are by the Lord. And so it seems to me that if we are, as a church, if we are going to create within our midst this culture of evangelism and share the gospel with other people without being constantly badgered, then it seems to me it's going to be because of our love for Jesus and in response to the love that He has demonstrated towards us, a love which then compels us to want to love other people and share this message of the gospel to these people because we love them, and especially people that you know. I'm not talking necessarily about a total stranger, although those opportunities may present themselves, but people that you know and people you genuinely care about. As Michaela pointed out, if we truly love them, what is the greatest thing that you can do to show somebody you love them? And that is to try to help them come to the Lord so that they can have what you have, what I have, sharing the message of the gospel with them to the best of our ability. I thought we would get a lot further, in particularly some of the questions that were being asked, but we've only got a minute left. And 2 minutes? Well, that clock says 1. I don't know who set that. Oh, yeah, I do. I did. So anyway, does anybody have any observations? The next time we come back, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a second factor that I think is just as important, and that is the need for confidence in the power of the gospel. So we'll talk about that, and we will answer some more of these questions, and if there's more questions that are put in that box, I'll try to field them too as well and see if I can incorporate them into this. I hope this has been helpful for you guys. I hope it's been something that at least is, we're on the road. We're taking steps. And the first step is this step of love, to understand how loved we are and that we want to share that love with other people. All right, thanks you guys for your contribution to our workshop.
or we'll sing from the slides as well. They're coming up, but How Sweet, How Heavenly will be our first song tonight, number 334, if you want to follow along in the book. How sweet, how heavenly. We'll sing all 5 verses. And if you'd like to, after the comments this evening, we'll sing number 846, Come Sinner Come. I'm going to mark that, Come Sinner Come. Now we'll sing How Sweet, How Heavenly. How sweet, how heavenly is the sight when those that love the Lord in one another's feast delight, and so fulfill the word. When each can fill his brother's sight, and with him bear apart. When sorrow flows from eye to eye, and joy from heart to heart. When free from envy, scorn, and pride, our wish is all above. Each can his brother's failings hide, and show a brother's love. When love in one delightful stream through every bosom flows. When union sweet and dear esteem in every action glows. Love is the golden chain that binds the happy souls above, and he's an heir of heaven who finds his bosom glow with love.
Good evening. My comments this evening are going to echo some of Tom's comments from class, and he actually stole my main point, so I guess I'm just going to emphasize it. But I wanted to read from 1 John. 1 John chapter 3, verses 16 through 18, and then I'll skip to chapter 4, verses 7 through 12. So 1 John 3, verses 16 through 18. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. And then skipping to chapter 4, verses 7 through 12. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us, and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. So there's a lot of implications from what we read, but specifically I want to think about this concept of love. It's the Christian's highest calling. All other callings of a Christian's life are subservient and subsumed within the calling of love. And the way that we love one another and the way that we feel the love of Christ and that is shown in our lives, I think is truly the greatest testimony that we can make to the world around us. As the passage in chapter 3 said, if we see our brother in need and close our heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? And we shouldn't love in word or talk, but in deed and truth. And I also wanted to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the first 3 verses. First Corinthians 13, 1 through 3. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. I think a lot of times when it comes to evangelism and how we talk about doing it well, it seems like we really focus on what arguments are we going to bring, and how are we going to prepare to have the right thing to say in the right moment to answer every objection. But I think if that is our main focus and we do not focus on and show and feel the love of Christ, it's going to be empty words, and that's what people are going to hear, and they're not going to respond to it. And I even think if we do show this kind of love that these passages have talked about, truly showing, feeling, visibly the love of Christ, we might not have the greatest arguments, but I think that love could win over many people where an argument could never do it. So, again, nothing that Tom didn't really say, but just wanting to emphasize that again. And I think it's one thing to talk intellectually about the love of Christ and feeling that and showing that, but I think that's something that all of us, and it might take a whole lifetime and more, to truly feel that, and for that to truly be demonstrated in a way that where we truly understand the significance. And I think if we truly did, we would probably never sin. But I think that's part of a Christian's life, is growing in understanding and then demonstrating the love of Christ. So just some things for us to think about. I'm glad we had the workshop this evening to talk about these things. But the opportunity is here for anyone who has not obeyed the gospel, has not come to know the love of Christ. The opportunity is here to be baptized into his death. And he's so richly provided for us to raise us to new life with the hope of eternal life with him. So if we can help you with that this evening, please come forward as we stand and sing.
While Jesus whispers to you, come, sinner, come. While we are praying for you, come, sinner, come. Now is the time to own him, come, sinner, come. Now is the time to know him, come, sinner.
Please join me in prayer. Our glorious God and Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. We come before you at this time to give you thanks for all the many blessings that you've bestowed on us. We thank you for this beautiful day that you've given us and the opportunity tonight to come learn more about your word and evangelizing and sing praises to you. We ask that you be with those that are unable to be here and that to help them get back to their much needed health to be able to come back to us. We thank you for being with those that have been traveling and that they were able to arrive to their destination safely. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.